I'm Lauren Reed, 33 years old, and the day I buried my brother, my father made sure I stood in the back row of the church. Not with the officers, not with the family. He leaned over and whispered, "Remember your place. You're just a dispatcher." He straightened the collar of his old police chief's uniform like the funeral was a ceremony for his legacy. What he didn't know was that my FBI badge was in my coat pocket and 3 men in dark suits had already taken their seats in the back pew. By the time the service ended, everything he believed about me would be gone. Before I go any further, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who never really saw you. I grew up in a Pennsylvania town where the Reed name meant one thing: you wore the badge. My grandfather joined the force in 1953, worked the same beat for nearly 4 decades. My father signed up on his 19th birthday and climbed his way to chief by the time I hit high school. At dinner, his badge sat on the table beside the salt shaker. "Reed's run toward danger," he'd say, like it was scripture. My older brother Matt soaked it all in. He was 4 years ahead of me, and from the moment he could walk, he wanted to be a cop just like Dad. He wore Dad's old uniform shirt for career day in 2nd grade. It hung past his knees, and he beamed like it was a cape. By high school, he was already enrolled in the cadet program learning procedures, while his friends were still goofing off at the mall. I was different. Quieter. I'd sit at the table studying Dad's old case files, trying to make sense of the patterns he left scattered across yellowed folders. Sometimes I'd point something out, something small he had missed. Once our neighbor, a detective, even said I had a sharp eye. Dad didn't like that much. "Book smarts," he said. Real police work happens on the street. I never forgot that phrase, and I heard it often. Even when I got into Georgetown to study criminal justice, it barely registered with him. That same week, Matt got into the police academy. We were both accepted into our dreams, but at dinner, Dad raised a toast only for Matt. "To continuing the Reed legacy," he said. Only when my mom gently added, "Lauren has some news too," did Dad glance over and say, "Oh, right. Georgetown." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll make a good dispatcher someday. Support roles matter too." I knew where I stood in our family's world. Matt was the future of the name. I was the backup plan. But Matt never saw it that way. The night before I left for school, he pulled me aside and said, "They just don't get it, Lo. But I do. You're going to outrank all of us one day. Just promise me you won't forget the little people when you do." He meant it, even when I didn't believe it myself. After graduation, I couldn't stomach the idea of working a desk job for the county, but I also wasn't ready to lose my place in the family altogether, so I applied for a dispatch position close to home. When I told Dad, he finally smiled like I'd made the right decision. "Now that's practical," he said. "You'll learn how things work from the inside." I did, but I also did more than they ever knew. In my spare time, I analyzed call logs, mapped out patterns, tracked clusters of drug-related incidents across towns. It wasn't part of my job, but I couldn't help myself. One of those maps caught the eye of a lieutenant who said my report helped crack open a larger investigation. Word spread. One of my reports made it to a federal task force. That's how the FBI found me. A few months later, I stood in my apartment holding an acceptance letter to Quantico. I told my family I was moving to a federal dispatch office. "Better pay," I said. "More responsibility." Dad approved. Mom asked if I'd be home in time for the July parade. Only Matt pulled me aside as I left and said, "You're not just moving, are you?" I shook my head. "You can't tell them," I said. He smiled. "Your secret's safe with me. But someday I want to see Dad's face when he finds out. I'll bring popcorn." That day came, just not how any of us expected. We buried Matt on a Thursday. It had rained the night before, so the church lawn was soft, and the folding chairs left deep impressions in the ground. By the time we got there, officers from 3 counties were already lined up outside the cathedral, their dress uniforms sharp badges wrapped in black bands. They filed in with quiet reverence, nodding to my father as they passed. He nodded back the retired chief once again in command, even in grief. I was asked to enter through a side door. I sat in the last pew. Not with the officers, not with the family. Dad positioned Mom up front, then took the seat beside her. When I tried to move closer, he motioned toward the back. "This isn't about you, Lauren," he said under his breath. "We don't want distractions." I nodded. Didn't argue. I'd played that role before. The church filled quickly. Matt's casket was already at the front, draped with the flag, his cap placed neatly on top. There was a weight in the air that pressed down on everything. As the service began, I focused on the people. Not the prayers, not the hymns, just faces, the officers near the altar, the group near the aisle, the men in the back row in suits sitting just a little too straight, eyes moving a little too much. They didn't look like mourners. They looked like watchers. I kept my eyes on them while Matt's chief stepped up to speak. He talked about Matt's dedication, his instincts, the way he treated the job like a calling. Said he was the kind of officer you hoped would show up to your worst day. Then, Detective Rodriguez, Matt's partner, took the podium. His voice was steady until it wasn't. "We had coffee the morning of the bust," he said, clearing his throat. He showed me pictures of his sister. Said she was brilliant. Not sure what she did exactly, but he always said she could run circles around the rest of us. I saw Dad shift in his seat. Just a small movement, but I felt it. Then it was his turn. Dad stood with the same posture he'd had for every promotion, every city meeting, every official duty. He talked about tradition, about honor, about service. Matt followed in the footsteps of his grandfather and father, he said. He wore the badge with pride and knew what it meant to serve. He named Mom, thanked her for her quiet support, then added, "And his sister Lauren, who works in Federal Dispatch." He moved on without pause. That was all. I didn't flinch, not visibly, but I heard the silence around me. Then came the flag presentation. Taps. The folding. Dad took the flag with both hands, eyes closed, lips tight. As the service ended, I checked my phone discreetly. A message from Murray Target confirmed. Surveillance ongoing. Call ASAP. I slipped outside to the church's rear lawn and dialed. "They're here," Murray said. 3 cartel associates identified by facial match. They're observing, not acting. But this is their standard procedure documenting officer networks. I looked back at the side door. "You want to move now?" I asked. Quietly, he said. "No uniforms. No guns out. We can't have chaos at a funeral. You'll need local cooperation." "Exactly. That's why we need you. They know you as Matt's sister. You can get us access." I didn't speak right away. I knew what it meant. Walking up to the captain, giving orders, saying it out loud in front of Dad. 8 years of secrecy gone in an instant, but there wasn't another way. "I'll talk to Winters," I said. I stepped back inside and moved toward the officers near the memorial display. I caught Captain Winters' eye just as movement started across the church. Murray's agents shifting. Quiet, calculated steps spreading out. One of the cartel men stood up, started for the side exit. Agent Reed Murray called out loud enough for nearby officers to hear. "We need you now." The room shifted. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. My father stood across the aisle staring. I turned to Winters. "Captain, I'm Special Agent Lauren Reed, FBI. Those 3 men are here conducting surveillance on officers involved in Matt's task force. We need to secure them quietly." To his credit, Winters didn't blink. "What do you need? Plainclothes containment. Soft perimeter. No sudden moves." He nodded and turned to his lieutenants. As the officers moved, Dad pushed through the crowd. "What is going on?" he demanded. "Lauren, what is this?" Murray stepped forward. "Chief Reed, I'm Supervisory Special Agent Desmond Murray. Your daughter has been a critical part of our organized crime division for the past 8 years. Dad looked at me. "You're FBI?" "Yes," I said. "I couldn't tell you. It was classified." Around us, the men and women Dad had known for decades now looked at me differently, some confused, some surprised. Rodriguez smiled. "Makes sense," he said quietly. "Matt always deflected when we asked what you did. Told us not to worry about it." I turned back to Winters. "We still need to finish the extraction." "Go," he said. "We'll keep things calm in here." I moved toward the side of the church where 2 agents were already guiding one of the suspects out. The man caught my eye and froze. He recognized me. Not from the funeral, from a case. "Antonio Vargas," I said, "seen in Harrisburg last year. Mid-tier contact." He didn't speak, just kept walking. As we cleared the last suspect and agents confirmed transport was on its way, I turned to see Dad still standing near the pews. His shoulders were set, but his face looked lost. He walked over slowly. 8 years, he said. 8 years of believing you were answering phones. You never asked, I said. You just assumed. He didn't argue. Officers began coming over then, not with condolences, but with professional nods, questions, quiet acknowledgments. Mom joined us, tears in her eyes. "I always knew it was something more," she said, hugging me. "Matt told me he couldn't say anything, but that you were doing real work. Important work." I couldn't speak. Not right then. The service moved on, but something in the air had changed. Winters approached again before we left. "What you did today," he said. "Putting the mission first. Matt would have done the same." He hesitated. "Also, your team's intel helped shape the operation, the one Matt was on." I felt that in my chest, the overlap, the unseen connection. "You were both in the same fight," he said, "just from different sides of the field." As the crowd began heading to the cemetery, Dad stood beside me. His voice was quiet. "We should ride together," he said. It wasn't just about the ride. And for the first time, I said I'd like that. We rode in silence to the cemetery. The police escort moved slowly, lights on but sirens off. A long line of cars stretched behind us, winding past familiar blocks, places Matt and I used to ride our bikes. The radio was off. The windows cracked slightly. Mom stared straight ahead, hands folded over a tissue in her lap. Dad kept both hands on the wheel. He hadn't said a word since asking if we could ride together. The cemetery was quiet when we arrived, a small rise of land at the edge of town. The honor guard waited near the burial site, standing at attention. Matt's casket had already been placed on the frame above the grave, the flag still folded. The ceremonial rifle team stood to one side, positioned and ready. We stepped out of the car, and an officer guided us to the front row of chairs beneath a white canopy. Dad didn't reach for Mom's hand, but she looped her arm through his anyway. I sat on her other side close enough to hear her breath catch with every movement. The chaplain spoke briefly. Nothing new, just words of comfort, service, sacrifice. Then came the 21-gun salute. Sharp, clean bursts, each one echoing a little too long in the still morning air. Taps followed, played by a single bugler near a willow tree. The notes rose slowly, steady, each one more final than the last. When they handed Dad the folded flag, he didn't speak, just nodded, held it close, and stared at the ground. After the formalities, people lingered. A few of Matt's closest colleagues approached one by one, some in uniform, others in plain clothes. They shared stories, bits of laughter, pieces of who Matt was on the job. things I hadn't heard before. "He talked about you all the time," Officer Chin said softly. "Called you the brains of the family." I didn't answer right away. "We never understood why a dispatcher needed multiple degrees," she added. "But I guess we do now." Detective Sanderson stopped beside her. "He mentioned you helped with the Wilson trafficking case. Told me once he couldn't explain how you knew so much, just that you were helping behind the scenes." I nodded. "He figured it out a while back. Made me promise not to tell anyone." They both smiled. Small, tired expressions, not forced, just honest. More officers came over asking quiet questions about the earlier operation, about the arrests. A few simply nodded as they passed. Not condolences, more like recognition. Dad stood nearby watching every exchange. His eyes followed the officers as they approached, listened, then stepped back. Captain Winters came over last. He didn't say much at first, just looked at the three of us, then stepped closer. "We're holding an informal gathering at Brenner's," he said. "Matt's favorite place. Just the team. No speeches, no programs. Figured you might want to come." Mom looked at Dad. He nodded. "We'll be there," he said quietly. We followed behind as the crowd began to break apart. The hearse pulled away first, then the honor guard. By the time we reached our car again, the parking area had thinned out. Dad and I walked ahead, just the two of us. He kept his eyes forward. "I don't know what to say to you," he said, not looking over. I didn't rush him. 8 years, he went on. 8 years of thinking you were someone else. I waited, and now I don't even know where to start. I stopped beside him. "You know part of it," I said. "The rest. Some of it I can't share. Some of it I never could." He nodded slowly. "Because of the clearance, partly. And because I knew how you'd react." He gave a quiet huff. Not quite a laugh. "You thought I'd belittle it?" he said. I didn't answer. He already knew. "Real police work," he muttered. I must have said that 100 times. "More," I said, not unkindly. He shook his head. "I didn't know what it sounded like. I thought I was pushing you to be strong, to do something real. And what I was doing didn't count." He didn't answer. We drove to the restaurant in near silence again. This time, though, the quiet felt different. Not so much a wall as a pause, something unfinished. Matt's favorite booth had already been taken by a group of younger officers. They moved when they saw us enter, offering it up without a word. The room was dim, filled with soft conversation and clinking glasses. Someone had ordered the nachos. Matt always got extra jalapenos. Someone else played his favorite Johnny Cash song from the jukebox. After about an hour, Dad leaned toward me. "Will you be able to tell me about the case?" he asked. The one that led to this?" I took a sip of water. "Some of it. Not all." He nodded. "Just tell me what you can." I looked at him. His eyes were steady now, not defensive, not closed off, just tired. "I will," I said. We didn't stay long after that. Mom was getting tired. The drive home was quiet again. But this time, Dad turned on the radio. Soft oldies, nothing loud. It played until we pulled into the driveway. The porch light had been left on. The same porch where Matt and I used to sit in the summers eating popsicles and playing cards. I waited as Dad locked up the car. Then he turned to me. "You want to sit for a minute?" he asked. I nodded. We went around back and sat in the old metal chairs under the maple tree. The sun had set, but the sky still held some light. After a while, he spoke again. "When Murray called you one of their best, was that just a nice thing to say because of the day?" "No," I said. "It was true. So all this time, you and Matt were working the same case, from different sides. He didn't know that. But yes. He looked at the grass for a long moment. If you'd told him, if you'd warned him about who he was up against, would it have changed anything? I answered honestly. I don't know. We had the broader picture names. Patterns, flow of money. He had the tactical side. The bust itself was local. He nodded. He was careful, Dad said. Always followed protocol. I know. We sat quietly. Then Dad stood and walked inside. When he came back, he was holding an old folder, his personal file. Inside was a sealed envelope. He handed it to me. Matt gave me this. 6 months ago, he said, told me not to open it unless something happened. My name was on the front. I opened it slowly. There was a letter and a small flash drive. Dear Lauren. The letter began, if you're reading this, things have gone sideways, and Dad finally knows. So I figured I'd help you out. He had collected everything, articles, commendations, even a recording from an internal agency newsletter where I'd been interviewed under a different title. I wanted him to see what real law enforcement looks like now, the note said. You always said I'd figure it out. Well, I did. And I'm proud of you. I handed the letter to Dad. He read it carefully. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He made a whole presentation, Dad said, organized it all for me. He held up the flash drive. He wanted me to understand. I didn't say anything. Neither of us did. We just sat there the night pressing in around us. The next morning was still. No sounds from the street, no cars passing, just the soft hum of the kitchen fridge and the tick of the old wall clock above the sink. I sat with a mug of coffee, both hands wrapped around it, the letter from Matt folded neatly in front of me. Dad hadn't come downstairs yet. Mom was already gone, she said. She needed air, had taken a walk to the cemetery early, just her and the sunrise. When Dad finally came down, he moved slower than usual, not stiff, just careful. He poured a cup of coffee, didn't say anything at first. Then he pulled out the flash drive Matt had prepared and set it next to the newspaper. Not today, he said quietly. But soon. I nodded. He sat across from me, looked like he wanted to say something, but the words got stuck. Go ahead, I said. He looked at me. Was it really all classified? His voice was low. Or were you just protecting yourself from me? I didn't answer right away. Then I said both. He leaned back in his chair. I used to think I knew everything about both of you. I knew when you were lying, when you were hiding something. Or at least I thought I did. You saw what you expected to see, I said. And I didn't challenge it. It was easier that way. He rubbed a hand down his face. You think I pushed you away? No, I said. I think you had a very specific idea of what counted, and I didn't fit it. We sat quietly after that, the kind of quiet that isn't uncomfortable but full. He finally said, when I told you real police work happens on the streets, I meant it as a challenge, something to reach for. I know I said, but it came off like a door closing. He gave a slow nod, eyes fixed on the rim of his coffee mug. Later that afternoon I packed my things. My leave was almost over and the case was still active. I needed to return to D.C. within a couple days. As I folded a sweater into my duffel, Mom knocked gently on the door frame. You're going soon, day after tomorrow. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed. Matt said you were doing something important, she said. He didn't say what, just that you were helping people, that he was proud. I nodded, still folding. You okay? She asked. I don't know yet. She stood and rubbed my shoulder gently before stepping out. I zipped the bag halfway and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the open window. That evening, Dad asked if I'd sit out back again, the same spot under the tree. The air was warm enough to be comfortable, but not hot. He carried out 2 glasses, his usual whiskey, and a soda for me. Matt told me once, he said, that you taught him how to question things, that just because we'd always done something one way Didn't mean it was the right way. I looked at him. We talked about that a lot. You used to fight, he said. You and him. Always on opposite sides of every conversation. But he listened to you, more than I ever did. I didn't respond. He took a sip. You said your team worked on the bigger picture, he continued. Trafficking routes, communication channels, organization structures. Yes, and that intel helped build the case that led to the operation. I nodded. We didn't know he'd be part of that specific raid, but yes, our reports helped set the wheels in motion. Do you think he stopped? Do you think if you'd known he'd be there, you would have done anything differently? The question hung in the air. I looked up at the sky, then back down. I've asked myself that, I said, over and over. I don't know. I followed protocol. I didn't know the target site until after. He nodded again, more slowly this time. It wasn't your fault, he said finally. Thank you. He looked at the flash drive still in his hand. He said you'd outrank all of us someday. I laughed when he said it. He told me the same thing before I left for Georgetown. He turned the flash drive over in his hand. I used to think leadership looked one way, badge stripes, field work. But this was something else. I didn't answer, didn't need to. We sat there a while longer, just two people trying to rebuild something out of what was left. Later, I found Mom in the kitchen packing up leftover food from visitors. She paused and looked over. You're coming back for Thanksgiving, right? I'll try, I said. It depends on how the case goes. She handed me a Ziploc of cookies. Just try. 2 days later, I drove back to Quantico. The route was familiar, but it felt different now. I pulled into the agency parking garage just before noon and headed upstairs. The team was already deep into briefing when I stepped in. Murray nodded toward an open seat. Agent Reed, he said. Good to have you back. The screen in front showed updated intelligence, new names, new photos, connections starting to appear between cells in 3 states. All of it layered over the same cartel network we'd been tracking. Murray looked over at me. You ready? I looked at the file. Matt's name had been added to the list of fallen officers who contributed to the case. More than ready, I said. The next morning, I arrived early to the office. Lights were still off in most of the building. I stood outside the secure briefing room with a coffee in one hand and my badge in the other, waiting for the scanner light to go green. Inside, the air felt cold from overnight, the kind of cold that settles into your shoulders. I took my usual seat near the back, logged in, and pulled up the latest case files. The names had changed, but the pattern hadn't. 3 new cells uncovered, all running through the same eastern corridor. Routes we'd flagged months earlier now confirmed. Pieces were falling into place. Murray walked in just after 7. He gave a short nod as he passed, then stopped beside me. We got something, he said quietly. Came from the debrief after the memorial arrests. I stood and followed him into the war room. A fresh board had been set up along the west wall. Photos, maps, and red-tagged documents were pinned in neat rows. Right at the center was a name I recognized. Daniel Cortez, alias El Sucio, High-Level Logistics. His name came up during the initial interviews, Murray said. They didn't know his location, but they knew who he answers to. And he knew who Matt was. I looked at the files. He ordered the retaliation, most likely. I exhaled slowly. This isn't a side thread anymore, Murray added. This is the main artery. We briefed the team that afternoon. I went over the new intel, walking through the likely distribution points, the laundering patterns, the safe houses. I outlined the movements that had gone unnoticed for years, small cash deposits, overlapping shipping manifests, burner phone patterns between Virginia and upstate New York. Someone asked about timelines. Someone else asked how confident we were. I said the words I knew they needed the pattern holds, and we're not guessing anymore. After the meeting, I stayed behind to organize the analysis logs. Murray came back in with a folder in hand. "We need a lead on this piece," he said. "Someone who knows both the field and the analysis side." I looked at the form. It was a formal designation case lead. "You sure?" I asked. "No one's better for it." I signed the form. Later that week, I flew to Charlotte to coordinate with a regional field office. 2 more interviews had produced a potential location, an out-of-use trucking depot on the outskirts of town. We set up overnight surveillance. I didn't sleep much. Too many details running through my head. Phone records, vehicle sightings, odd financial transfers between shell companies that looked like donations. When we finally moved in, it was clean. No shootouts, no alarms. Just 3 men surprised mid-conversation, too stunned to run. Inside one of the trailers, we found documents, ledger pages written in code that matched what Matt had logged in one of his earlier reports. Same handwriting, same figures. I took photos before sealing them for evidence. Back at the field office, I sat in a corner cubicle with the pages spread out in front of me. A young analyst named Raj stepped in, offered to grab me coffee. I nodded, didn't look up. I was already halfway through matching the numbers to our database when my phone buzzed. "Dad." I stared at the name for a moment, then answered. "Hey, you working, yeah? Field office in Charlotte." He paused. "I didn't know you traveled so much." "Depends on the case." Another pause. "How's it going? We made progress today." He exhaled. "I keep thinking about that flash drive," he said. "Haven't watched it yet. Don't want to do it alone. We can do it together. I'd like that." We hung up a few minutes later. It was the first time he'd called without asking about logistics. No questions about how long I'd be gone or if I'd be back for dinner. Just a check-in. 2 days later, back in D.C., we started piecing together the Cortez network. The ledger from the depot led to a set of offshore transactions enough to flag federal wire transfer authorities. One wire in particular matched an account Matt's team had noted in their pre-raid reports. It had been dismissed at the time, looked like a standard contractor payment. "They were paying off the warehouse owner," I said, pointing at the screen. "They used construction invoices to mask the transfers." Murray tapped his pen. "How long until we can act on this depends on how quickly Treasury confirms the route. But once they do, we can freeze movement." He nodded. "This time we take the top off the board." That evening I stayed late. The office was mostly quiet. I opened a secure message window and sent a summary to Winters, the captain from Matt's department. "You might want to pass this on to your folks," I wrote. "Your work laid the foundation for this." He replied within 5 minutes. "He'd be proud of you, Lauren." "We all are." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the photo pinned beside my monitor, Matt, in his uniform, smiling a little squint from the sun. The quiet in the room felt different now. Not heavy, not hollow, just steady. 3 weeks after the raid on the Charlotte depot, the final piece landed. A flagged offshore account long dormant suddenly moved $500,000 through 3 shell corporations in less than 48 hours. Our financial analyst caught it on a Friday morning. By that afternoon, we had a search warrant for a private property just outside Richmond. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, gated unlisted, nothing remarkable from a distance. Inside, we found more than we expected: ledgers, encrypted drives, weapons and photographs, some of them taken at police memorials. One of those photographs showed Matt. Murray didn't speak for a long time after that. He stood in the corner of the room, flipping through the pages, slowly, gloves tight against his wrists. "We were never off the trail," he said quietly. "They were just a step faster." By Sunday, the name Daniel Cortez appeared on 3 sealed warrants. The logistics chief, the one who'd greenlit operations across the East Coast, and likely Matt's as well. Monday morning, we met with a joint task force made up of FBI, DA, and local teams. Murray handed me the room. I outlined the movement timeline, presented the surveillance patterns, and listed our targets. 8 in total. 1 of them confirmed in-country. The rest spread out. We assigned teams sealed documents and began prep for the takedown. The following week was a blur of movement-coordinated arrests, early morning entries, and secured digital evidence. I was in and out of 4 field offices. Every night I called home. Dad always answered. Sometimes he didn't say much, just asked if I was okay. Other times he asked to hear the part he'd missed. Not the classified parts, but the things that made the job feel real to him. On Thursday, I told him the arrest orders had been signed. Daniel Cortez would be in custody by week's end. "You were right," he said. "You finished it." "Not alone," I told him. He didn't argue. The morning of the operation, I stood with Murray in a small command trailer on the edge of a county line. Live feeds flickered across the screens, thermal scans, drone angles, exterior cameras locked onto the target building. The tactical lead gave the signal. Teams moved. It took 11 minutes. Cortez was inside armed but alone. He surrendered without a word. Later in the debrief, he requested to speak to federal only. I was present for the first round. He refused to answer most questions, but when my name came up, he paused. "Your brother didn't beg," he said. I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I wrote it in the notes, then stepped out. Back in D.C., the evidence room filled quickly. The case folders grew thicker. Photographs, testimony, digital logs, all added to the chain. Cortez's organization had crumbled. By midweek, the department sent out a formal memo. The Eastern Distribution Corridor was considered dismantled. We gathered in the conference room. Murray stood at the head of the table. "This didn't start here," he said. "This started with smaller pieces. Officers on the ground, local units doing the hard work. Some of them didn't make it home." He looked at me. "We're closing the file," he said, "but the story's still being written." Afterward, I went back to my desk. Pinned beside Matt's photo was the final case seal. His name and mine, different titles, same case. I printed 2 copies. That evening, I drove down to my parents' house. Dad was already out back, sitting in the chair under the old maple. The porch light was on. The air smelled like cut grass and early fall. I sat beside him, handed him the document. He looked at the heading, read through the lines slowly. When he got to the signatures, he paused. "You did it," he said again, this time not as a statement but something softer. "We did it," I said. "All of us." He nodded. He'd be proud. "I know." He leaned back in his chair, folded the paper once, then again. "We should watch that flash drive," he said. "Tonight, yeah." We went inside. Mom had already pulled it up on the living room TV. She'd set out coffee, 2 slices of pie. The screen flickered, then Matt's face appeared. His voice was steady. He looked straight into the lens. "Hi, Dad. If you're seeing this, something's happened. And you probably don't know everything about Lauren. I thought it was time someone told you." He went on for 13 minutes. He showed the news clippings, the commendations, the analysis she'd done for federal cases. He talked about her training, her record, the agents who trusted her, the team that followed her lead. She didn't wear the same badge. "But she's one of us," he said. "And honestly, she's the one I always looked up to." Dad didn't speak for a long time after it ended. When he did, his voice was low. I thought I understood what service looked like. "You did," I said. "Just not all of it." He nodded once. We watched the video through twice that night. Once in silence, then again with Dad stopping it every few minutes, pausing on Matt's face, on the documents, the photographs, the words he'd chosen. He didn't cry, not in the way people usually do, but his hands stayed on the armrests of the recliner, gripping just tight enough that his knuckles stayed pale the whole time. After the second viewing, he stood without saying much, went out to the porch. I followed a minute later. We sat on opposite ends of the bench where Mom usually set the fall wreaths. He looked out into the dark yard. "He knew you better than I did," he said. I didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the trees. A few leaves blew across the grass. "He knew both sides of you," he added. "The little sister and the agent. He figured it out a few years ago," I said. "Never asked questions, just told me to be careful." He nodded slowly. "He told me once that I'd understand." "Someday," Dad said. "I think I finally do." The next morning I packed early. My return to Quantico was scheduled for Monday, but I wanted to be back in time to close the Cortez files before the final transfer to Justice. Dad helped load my bag into the car. Before I climbed in, he stepped back and looked at me. "If you get time," he said, "I'd like to know more. Whatever you can tell me." "I will," I said, bit by bit. He nodded. Then just before I shut the car door, he added, "I'm proud of you, Lauren, not just for what you do, but for how you do it." I didn't speak, just smiled once and started the engine. When I walked back into the office that Monday, the case board had been cleared. The names were filed, evidence boxed, indictments drafted. The space that had once held months of planning now held only a new heading transition. Murray met me near the elevator. "Interviews are done," he said. "Court dates are coming together. Agents in all 3 regions gave statements. You're officially off the clock on this one." I followed him into the conference room. A folder sat at the head of the table, sealed. "There's one last thing," he said. "We submitted a joint citation, Justice Bureau and local, for service and interagency leadership." He slid the folder toward me. I opened it. My name was listed second. Matt's was listed first. They wanted to recognize the joint effort, Murray said. "Same case, 2 sides. You both played your part." The room felt still. I closed the folder and ran my hand over the cover. "Thank you." He nodded. "You earned it." That evening I scanned a copy of the citation and emailed it to Dad. "Thought you'd want a clean version," I typed. "It's official now." His reply came less than 5 minutes later. "It's framed already." In the weeks that followed, life shifted. Not back to what it was, but forward into something different. I went back to work full-time. The team moved on to new assignments. A few agents rotated out. New faces came in. Dad started calling every week. Sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to ask questions. One night he said I was wrong about a lot of things. "You were doing what you knew I told him." "Still," he said, "I kept thinking there was only one kind of service, the one I could see." "There's more than one kind," I said. "Always has been." By Thanksgiving, I was back home. Mom had set the table with the good dishes. Dad had cleaned out the garage. The folder with the citation sat on a bookshelf in the living room right beside the old family photo of Matt in his uniform standing next to Dad on the courthouse steps. After dinner, while Mom brewed coffee, Dad and I sat at the kitchen table, just the 2 of us. "You think you'll stay in field work?" he asked. "For now," I said. "There's still more to do." He nodded. "You'll let me know if there's something I can help with." I looked at him. "You already have." He smiled, then looked down at the coffee mug in front of him. "Matt would have liked all this," he said. The way it turned out, he always liked the idea of finishing what he started. "He did finish it," I said. "We just didn't know it yet." Dad reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded photo, one I hadn't seen before. It showed Matt sitting on the hood of a patrol car laughing. There was a small note scribbled on the back in Matt's handwriting. "She'll get there. You'll see." Dad slipped the photo back into his pocket and sat quietly for a moment, his fingers still resting on the edge of his coffee cup. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of Mom rinsing dishes in the sink and a clock ticking steadily on the wall. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing against the window panes, the kind of wind that carried the first hints of winter. "He always believed in you," Dad said softly, "even when I didn't know how." I didn't speak. I just nodded, the weight of the last few months settling in a little differently now, less like a burden, more like something finally grounded. And now I see it, he added. Not just what you do, but why it matters. I reached across the table, set my hand over his. He didn't pull away. Mom joined us a few minutes later, placing a plate of pie between us. She smiled at Dad, then at me. There was still sadness behind her eyes, but something steadier too. Something that said we'd come through. The next morning, before I drove back to D.C., Dad handed me a small package wrapped in an old map of our town tied with twine. "For your desk," he said. Inside was a photo frame carved from walnut. The picture was one I hadn't seen before, Matt standing beside me at my Quantico graduation, both of us laughing, completely unaware someone had snapped the moment. In the background, Dad stood at a distance, arms folded, watching us with an unreadable expression. He asked me to take that, Dad said. Said he wanted to remember the day before everything changed. I placed it on my passenger seat for the drive. Back at Quantico, I set the frame beside my credentials on my desk. The photo of Matt in uniform stayed there too. The two sat side by side, two versions of the same story, finally side by side. In truth, not just memory, the case was closed, but the impact stayed. In the weeks that followed, more officers reached out, some from Matt's unit, others I'd never met. Some just wanted to say thank you. A few shared that they'd followed similar paths, siblings and service fathers with expectations, daughters who'd done the work quietly waiting to be seen. I answered every message. Dad calls more often now. Not every day, but enough. Sometimes he asks about my cases, what I can share. Other times he just wants to know how I'm doing. He even started sitting in on community safety panels. He listens more now. Doesn't just talk about how things were, but how they could be better. Mom told me he keeps the framed citation in his study, not the hallway, not the garage wall, but right by his desk. He reads it sometimes, she said. I don't think he even realizes he's doing it. Matt's name is listed on 2 federal briefings, now attached to the intelligence that led to the dismantling of a regional cartel route. Mine appears on the same pages. Different uniforms, same fight. Not every story ends with a medal or a moment of recognition. But sometimes justice isn't about who gets noticed. It's about who shows up, who keeps going, who holds the line quietly, steadily, without needing to be seen to make it count. Matt understood that long before the rest of us did. And I carry that with me now every time I open a new case file, every time I step into a briefing room. Every time I feel that weight again, I remember someone's watching. Someone believes in the work, even if they never say it out loud. Thanks for sitting with me through this story. If it reminded you of someone you've had to fight to be seen by, or if you've ever had to build your own path when others couldn't see your worth, I'd love to hear your story too. Take care of yourself and take care of each other.